I'd like to call to order the December 17, 2024 meeting of the West Palm Beach Planning Board. Madam Clerk, if you'd kindly call the roll.
Jean Marseille Jr.,
Present.
Patrick Mayfield,
Present.
Will Corrente,
Present.
Stephen Lyons,
Present.
Peter Pivko,
Present.
Deborah Rain,
Present.
Sam Fish.
Present.
Thank you.
All right, next order of business is approval of the November 19, 2024 minutes. Has everyone had the opportunity to review them? Are there any changes or corrections? And if not, I'm looking for a motion for approval.
I'll move approval.
Motion and
Second.
second. Motion and second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Next on the agenda is report of the planning staff. Ms. Van.
Good evening, board members. Angela Van, Planning and Zoning Administrator. Give you a quick update on the cases that have been heard since the last planning board meeting. This actually was one case. That was the First Baptist Church. RPD was rezoning from the current community service plan development for RPD to allow 2 residential towers, approximately 190 dwelling units, and revitalize the existing historic church, sanctuary, and the new worship hall and school, totaling approximately 146,000 square feet. You heard this at your September 17th meeting. Commission approved this on November 25th by 5-0 vote. And that's basically all the latest cases that's been heard since your last planning board meeting. Any questions?
Okay, any questions of Ms. Van? All right, thank you so much. Next on our agenda are remarks by the chairperson, of which I have none. Then is the declaration of ex parte communications. And let me begin by saying that I have had no ex parte communications. I have received no written communications. I have conducted no investigations. I have made no site visits, and I received no expert opinions. I request that these disclosures and all written communications be made a part of the record. Let me start on this side, Sam.
As to all the matters on the agenda, I have not had any ex parte communications. I have not received any written communications, not conducted an investigation. I have not made any site visits. I have not received any expert opinions. I request that these disclosures and all written communication be made part of the record.
Thank you, Deborah.
As to the matters of the agenda this evening, I have not had ex parte communications. I have not received written communications. I have not conducted an investigation. I have not made a site visit. I have not received expert opinions. I request that these disclosures and all written communications be made part of the record.
Thank you, Peter.
As to all matters in this evening's agenda, I have not received any ex parte communications. I have not received written communications. I have not conducted an investigation. I have not made a site visit, nor have I received any expert opinions, and I request that these disclosures and all written communications be made part of the record.
Thank you.
As to most of the matters this evening, so I just was having a conversation with the attorney. I was asked to serve as a volunteer on the Affordable Housing Action Committee. And some of the matters regarding density and affordable housing, workforce housing, I'm not sure because I missed the last.
Your questions to
No, I already talked to him.
Okay, and what was
So
his
this is-
recommendation to you, advice?
Well, I'm just going to say about my service on that committee. And so,
Right.
okay.
So you're disclosing it, which is good.
Yeah, no, so I'm
Mr.
just
Thomas,
disclosing.
anything more
I was
need to be
asked.
done
I
other than
was-
his disclosure of that prior involvement?
I think that's appropriate. We haven't looked at that committee, but my understanding is there's no compensation involved as far as service on that committee. There's no financial benefit or gain to him, so it would appear that that would be permissible.
And then maybe just to affirm that you'll decide your decisions here based solely on the evidence presented tonight.
Well, so I missed the last 2 meetings, so I have no idea whether the final presentation that's supposed to be made to the city is being incorporated into what we're discussing tonight, or if it's going to city council.
For purposes of tonight,
So for
Have whatever
purpose of
decision
tonight, I will make my decisions based solely on the evidence presented.
Perfect, and you can now make for the
As
rest of
to all matters discussed this evening or on the agenda, I have had no ex parte communication, I have no written communications, have not conducted an investigation, I have not made a site visit, and I have not received expert opinions. I request that these disclosures and all written communications be made part of the record.
Thank you so much, Will. Patrick.
With respect to all agenda items this evening, I have not had ex parte communications. I have not received written communications. I have not conducted an investigation. I have not made a site visit, and I have not received expert opinions. I request that these disclosures and all written communications be made part of the record.
Thank you so much. Jean.
As to all items on the agenda, I have not had ex parte communications. I have not received written communications. I have not conducted an investigation. I have not made a site visit. I have not received expert opinions. I request that these disclosures and all written communications be made part of the record.
All right, thank you so much. That then brings us to the swearing in of speakers. Would everyone who plans to speak or offer testimony this evening please stand up and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this proceeding will be truthful? Thank you. Next on our agenda are continued cases, of which there are none. That then brings us to Planning Board Case Number 1380D. And this is a city-initiated request.
Good evening, board members. I'm Maria Aponte, Assistant Development Services Director. We're here tonight to present to you case number Planning Board 1380D for rezoning and 1380E for the zoning and land development regulations. We're going to be doing a tag team tonight with this presentation. I'm going to do some brief introduction. Then we have Chris Rook, the director of the CRA, doing some also introductions and connection of these amendments to the CRA. Then we have the representatives from Dover Cole and Partners, that is the consultant firm that we hired to do the study for us. And then at the end, Jermaine Swelby from the Planning and Zoning Department is going to do the technical part, explaining to you what you are voting at the end of the day. So, as I say, we are here to discuss the amendments to the Broadway mixed-use district. Broadway, as you know, it's the long corridor that goes from 26 to the end of the north end of the city. It has been in bad shape for many, many years. The city implemented code revisions in 2003, but the regulations did not spur really redevelopment along the corridor. So in the last 20 years, since the regulations were adopted, nothing has happened along that corridor. And it's clear that something different needs to be done along this area to promote the redevelopment that is very needed. So we move ahead with this idea of drafting revised regulations for the corridor to basically promote the redevelopment of the area, and with the goal of not only promoting the redevelopment but have new construction in there, but also transform the corridor into a pedestrian-friendly environment that is like a core of the neighborhood and provide the services for the surrounding residential properties that are adjacent to the corridor. And also at the same time looking for possibilities to promote the construction of workforce housing units along this corridor that are barely needed in the city. So we embark on this effort as the city, leading with the Planning and Zoning Department, and also the CRA that was very much involved in the redevelopment efforts for this corridor. The corridor is a CRA district, so they have vested interest on that. And with their financial support, we were able to hire the services of Dover Cole and Partners, that is an urban design and planning firm with headquarters in Miami, that is basically leading the effort to draft the revised regulations. At the same time, we hired the services of Daedalus Advisory Services, that is consulting firm specialized in financial analysis. So what we did that was not probably done back in 2003 is we drafted the regulations, and then at the same time that we were drafting, we were testing to be sure that the numbers worked to promote the redevelopment. So Daedalus did a fantastic job like running the numbers and confirming that the proposed regulation was viable market-wise for a developer to come in and do the project. Of course, this is with a grain of salt because every site is different. Every property owner has different land costs and projects and things like that. But in general, the exercise was done to ensure that the proposed regulation was viable in terms of constructability for a developer to come in and promote a project. Also, it's good to know that the constraints on this corridor are enormous. The sites are very narrow, so the viability of having projects in these are very tight. So it's every inch counts, and we were very careful on the compatibility of the scale of the proposed development with the historic buildings, the historic districts that are on the right side, or even the residential districts that are on the west side. There are single-family districts that are worth to protect in terms of the scale, so the compatibility issues were an important consideration, and our call was fundamental on working on that. So having said that, I'm gonna turn it to Chris Rook, that is gonna introduce how the CRA ties into all this effort. And then after that, Cole is gonna present the proposed regulations.
Thanks, Anna. Chris Rook, Executive Director of the West Palm Beach Community Redevelopment Agency. Board members, thank you so much for this opportunity. I want to just take a moment and kind of, since the CRA was a big partner on this project, just kind of take a little bit of a moment to sort of talk about sort of the broader efforts that the CRA has really undertaken. So just as a quick overview, the CRA is charged with the removal of slum and blight through property improvements in our dedicated boundaries, and you'll see a map here in a moment. And we're governed by our board, which is the mayor and city commissioners. And each year we set a plan of our efforts. And Broadway has been a targeted area for redevelopment for some time now. And so much so that we've set very intentional goals in our strategic finance plan to really make that redevelopment occur in a very intentional way. The goals listed here were starting with the BMUD regulations was sort of the first effort that we embarked on. But I also wanted the board to know that concurrently with that, the CRA embarked on an aggressive land acquisition strategy to really get to a point where, under goal number 4, we could actually show proof of concept of the regulations that are before you today. And that was always the strategy moving forward. And the premise behind all of this was essentially to provide that catalytic project that would then signal to the private sector and to the property owners that, hey, these new regulations, it does create an opportunity for redevelopment and address a lot of the different needs that are currently existing along the corridor. So we wanted to make sure that we got this right, and the CRA put all of its resources and quite a bit behind this effort. And so as Anna Maria has just outlined, the CRA contracted Dover Cole to help with this effort and really spent the last 18 months making these regulations and doing quite a bit of outreach to a variety of groups, starting with our CRA Advisory Board, which is a group of residents and business owners in our designated areas that just got regular updates and sort of understood sort of the cadence of this effort. And then from there, we had, and you'll see a little bit more about this and see some pictures here in a moment, but really the outreach to the surrounding areas that are outside the CRA boundaries, because obviously we need them to support this corridor, and they are vested and they are very interested in the efforts that we embarked on with this rezoning. And then, of course, we needed the business community. It's of interest to the business community, specifically those folks that are part of the Chamber of Commerce, but also the local businesses in Northwood Village. They very much want to see this part of the city invested in and sort of revived in a really great way that sort of levels up the overall corridor. And then lastly, as Anna Marie had mentioned, making sure that this works not just for publicly owned lands, like those that are owned by the CRA, but just also on a private sector basis. We can't redevelop the corridor overall. We need private sector help, and we understood that. So with the financial analysis and understanding that even though we could only sort of test a couple of sites, the financial analysis that was also funded by the CRA came back in a really positive manner. And so really at this point, now we're in the adoption phase, and assuming that all goes well and you all support the regulations tonight, and then it goes on to the City Commission, the CRA will then take all of the efforts that we've done to date and continue to really push and promote development along the corridor. So I just wanted it to be on the record that this isn't the end. This is very much the beginning of a really intentional effort to really make this part of the city, just make it a really great and wonderful part that provides housing and all the needs that our residents need along the corridor. So with that, I want to turn it over to Dover Cole, who's been a great partner in this. I think you'll be really excited about what they're presenting.
Good evening, my name is Jackie Del Arca, and I'm here with Dover Cole & Partners.
And I'm Natalie Lipsy, also here with Dover Cole & Partners.
And we're here to present, like we were mentioning before, the zoning updates for the Broadway Mixed-Use District, which is the BMUD corridor. And like we were saying, we've been here for 18 months, just talking with the community, making sure that we are doing all the possible outreach in order to get all the feedback for this corridor. The first time we were here was back in the fall of 2023. We had around 180 people show up to the Manatee Lagoon. We had roundtable conversations. We had maps. People gave us the feedback in order to make sure and understand exactly what the needs of this community were. We came back in February of this year to present the draft code. We had around 100 people in that session. At the same time, in February, we went to two different outreaches. One was with the Rice Community Resource Center, and around 20 people showed up to that one. And then we also presented to the Esperanza Community Center, which was more of a Hispanic audience and Spanish-speaking people. So we wanted to make sure that we were reaching out to all the possible demographics that would be affected by this update in the code. We came back just a couple months ago with the revised outline of the code, and we had once again over 100 people in this workshop. So again, the community has been highly involved with all processes of this code update, and we have implemented the feedback that we have gathered from these different types of workshops. The community presented their ideas, they drew on maps, they told us their stories, they pinpointed different types of parts of the corridor to make sure exactly we were understanding what these needs were. And we even asked them, what's one word that comes to mind in Broadway corridor now? And the words you can see on the screen, they're not as encouraging. They said crime, they said drugs, sketchy, prostitution, and really this gave us an idea of all the issues that we were dealing with in this area. But the hope comes when we ask them what comes to mind about Broadway corridor in the future. And one of the biggest words on the screen, as you can see, it says potential, safe, walkable, modern. And we took all this feedback into the guidelines that we will be presenting today. When we came back in February, we asked them after we presented, based on what you heard tonight, is the plan on the right track? And overwhelmingly, more than 90% said probably yes or yes. So once again, the community has been involved, and we've been hearing what they have to say. So again, our goal is to revise the zoning ordinance to guide the growth and development of the community. We want to make sure that we are creating a walkable environment, a place where people want to be going. And like we were mentioning before, the study area has been from 25th Street to 59th Street of US 1. And we want to create infill opportunities, walkable opportunities, and just bring more of development within this zone. So just going through some of the details of the code, this is a code that will be form-based. So instead of focusing more on the FAR, we would be focusing on the shape of the buildings and how to create a walkable environment, a pedestrian-friendly environment, and making sure that the placement of the buildings is creating a place where people want to go, a destination, instead of what currently is more of an automobile-oriented district. So to summarize the first few sections of the code, then we will go into detail into all of these. The heights was one of the biggest concerns. We revised these quite a bit and made sure that we are adding the heights that we think would be bringing in the economic development and also an opportunity for affordable housing within this district. We also talked about the setbacks with the neighboring communities. We understand that there are historic districts attached to this BIMA district, so we wanted to make sure that we are respecting the houses that are right attached to these lots in US 1. We talked about the setbacks and the buffer requirements with the neighboring buildings to the sides. We also talked about the streetscape and understanding the improvements that could come in, the vegetation, how to address the street that currently is Broadway, the different uses that would be implemented within this district, and also how would we address if people want to expand beyond the Broadway mixed-use district as it is currently right now. We have very specific limitations and residential use only opportunities for this extension to the districts to the sides.
Now to go into a bit of more detail of what the code is actually regulating, we have a building height regulation. Currently, there's a 3-story max height regulation, and the new height will also be 3 stories. Unless there are bonuses that are met that could get you to a max 76 feet, which is 7 stories allowed. These bonus stories are based off of community benefits, which we'll go into further detail further in the presentation. That'll allow you to get to these 7 stories. In addition to height regulations, we also have setback regulations that help to create a more pedestrian-oriented streetscape along US 1. This is not just about the height regulation, it's also about what the community feels when they're walking along Broadway. These regulations are a 17-foot setback from Broadway, starting with a 7-foot furnishing landscaping zone, which will allow for trees along Broadway, creating a more walkable environment as you're walking along, as well as a 5-foot clear path that'll be the actual sidewalk area where it's free of any obstructions, and a 5-foot frontage zone, which is where you could have different signage, outdoor seating, all accounting into a primary streetscape along Broadway that's a 17-foot setback. It'll create something like this, which is a very highly pedestrian-oriented environment that will create a very active space along Broadway. This is an example of a CRA site that currently is vacant, and as it gets developed, this is what it could look like today with the regulations as is. With our new proposal, this site could look a little more like this, creating a more active area along Broadway. And with any public benefits, they can go up to 7 stories, with an example of a building such as this. These bonuses could be met through public benefits, which references the new ordinance that was added recently, which is the Affordable Housing Ordinance, creating a 50% additional units at max 120 AMI, or 25% at 80% AMI, 45% at 100 AMI, and 30% at 120 AMI. This is directly referencing the ordinance that was adopted recently. The secondary street also has a setback of 15 feet, which is 5-foot landscape zone, a 5-foot clear path, and a 5-foot frontage zone. That also acts as a landscape buffer zone in the case of parking areas, so that there isn't a direct line of sight from the street to the parking areas. As an example, this is the current case on side streets, and with these new zoning codes, you could create an environment more like this. Now we'll go into what the setbacks are from the existing single-family zone.
So as you can see on the screen, we currently have one of the properties on US 1, and towards the right of the screen, you can see one of the existing properties. So with the regulations that we're wanting to implement, the setbacks would be respected and the neighboring properties would not have a building right next to them, but rather there's quite a bit of space between what that house currently is and where the new building would be coming in. Some of these different guidelines that we've implemented for the rear setbacks are an 8-foot wall in the property line, a 5-feet vegetative buffer between the property and the new BMUD development, and then in order for a building to be built, it has to be at least 10 feet set back from that property line. The realistic situation in this is that we need parking, and with the parking, there would be even more of a setback from that rear property to the building itself. So as you can see on screen, this is an example with an alley and the parking, because the code would require the parking to be towards the back of the properties. So this is a more realistic setback situation as to which the BMUD district would be allowing. After the three stories that are allowed, if there are any other stories that come in with the bonus regulations, those stories would have to be set back 24 feet. So as you can see on this diagram, once again, the first 3 stories is a 10-foot setback, and then beyond the 3 stories, that would be 24 feet. Again, this creates more of a separation, more of a gap between the existing property and the proposed BMUD district properties. And once again, going through them, we would have the wall and the landscape buffer in the property line. Then we would have at least a 10 feet setback. And then once again, the 24 feet setback above the 3rd floor. So again, this creates quite a bit of space between the properties and making sure that they don't feel like their buildings are right next to them. Another thing we revised in this code update are the uses. And we revised the existing table of uses, and we removed pretty much any of the uses that were more for automobile-oriented uses. So anything that is on the list is allowed. Anything that is not on the list is not allowed. So again, we wanted to create more of a pedestrian-friendly environment and making sure that the pedestrian is respected and people can come and feel safe while walking in this district.
We also created a new zone called the BMUD-E, which is the BMUD expanded area. This BMUD expanded area takes into account the future of the sites surrounding the BMUD district. Developers will come, and we want to make sure that you are adequately prepared for what their questions will be. Some example questions is that they might buy a property along BMUD as well as an empty lot that's exactly adjacent to it. There are a couple properties that are outside of the BMUD zone but are also adjacent and vacant next to these districts that could be combined with the new property that's being developed to create a more viable development for cases such as other affordable properties if they wanted to get a bonus height. And we're looking into what these could be. This will still respect the properties that are already in use, as well as properties that are historic in the historic districts. We've made the requirement that these properties within the historic district must be vacant as of January 1st, 2025, to be accounted in this BMUD-E district. These properties outside of BMUD must be under the same ownership as these adjacent properties and must be all submitted at the same time to benefit from this BMUD-E district. Some further examples of what these could look like are as shown on the screen. They could have a larger building along BMUD, but there's a 3-story max limit on any of the properties within the expanded district. This will create a terracing effect so that there's not a property right next to the existing residential houses that is overwhelmed by the development right next door. The goal of this BMUD-E is to create more missing middle housing opportunities, such as townhouses, small apartments, cottage courts, ADUs, multiplexes, and this will create more opportunities for affordable housing within the district. For example, this property that's vacant along Broadway could become something like this, which has a mix of different uses, live-work environment, as well as parking in the center of these lots. The goal of BMUD is not to become a 30-story building. It's to become a 7-story building. And the goal of BMUD-E is not to have a 7-story building, but a 3-story building.
So to conclude, the proposed updates to this code would be emphasizing the opportunities for more housing within the district, for people to be able to live and work at the same place without long commutes. It would respect locally oriented businesses and make sure that the people within this district have opportunities to invest in their businesses within the new development that would be coming. There would be a walkable opportunities for the necessities of life, but also the quality of life, from the grocery store, for the locally oriented businesses, the services, all the way to more public spaces for a place to genuinely just enjoy a day with the family. We want to make sure that we are investing in this place and make sure that we are creating an opportunity for all. Again, we have a website. It's envisionbroadwayboulevard.com. We've been getting feedback from the community through that website. They've been highly informed, and once again, the feedback that we have received has been overwhelmingly positive, and any comments that we have received, we have already adjusted in the code with the constant revisions in the last 18 months in collaboration with the CRA. So now Jermaine will say some closing thoughts before we hear your comments.
Thank you.
All right, good day everyone. Jermaine Swavey, Planning and Zoning Senior Planner for the record. So the mixed-use districts include the Broadway Mixed-Use District, for which we're requesting the rezoning and the text amendment. And then you have the other two districts, the Northwood Mixed-Use District and the Core Mixed-Use District. Oh, sorry. Okay. Where are we? Okay, so we got the background on which was provided by the CRA. So I'll just be going into the request. So we're looking to rezone from the Broadway Mixed-Use District Building Type 1 and the Broadway Mixed-Use District Building Type 2 to Broadway Mixed-Use District. And this is just a map of what is existing. On the left, you have BMO Type 1 and 2, which is in purple and brown. And then to the right, just BMUD, which we're rezoning to. And then the request is to include the Zoning and Land Development Regulation Text Amendment to Section 94-4 to delete the current zoning categories and replace with the new Broadway Mixed-Use District. Section 94-209 to amend the Mixed-Use District regulations to add BMO definitions and regulations. Section 94-219 to delete the current development standards and incorporate new regulations. And Section 94-220 to delete the current text to be replaced with the Broadway Mixed-Use District expanded. And mailer notices were sent to properties within 500 feet of the BMUD zoning district. And staff finds that the request complies with the amendment and rezoning standards 94-32A. Staff is therefore recommending approval of Planning Board case number 1380D for the rezoning and Planning Board case number 1380E for the amendment. And that concludes the presentation.
Okay, thank you so much. Any questions of staff? Let me start on this end. Jean, any questions? Patrick?
I had one question. With respect to the proposed street side setbacks that were studied, and that 17 feet, within that 10 feet that's adjacent to the structure itself, there was a component in there about a bonus arcade. Does that, or the possibility for this arcade or architectural feature occupying the street, is that within that 17 feet, or?
Was that in my presentation?
It was in their presentation, I believe.
I don't believe we have a screen. Oh, the proper one is this one. So yes, we do allow for an arcade to be within that 17 feet. The arcade would then take part of instead of having the requirement to have a 7-foot landscape buffer, you can have an arcade, which uses the same effects of having a shaded environment for people to walk along, and also adds for this environment where you can have a 2nd-story extension along. It's not a livable environment, it's more of a balcony where you can gather on, but it creates the shaded space on the 1st floor.
Mm-hmm. So that line, I guess, of where the extent of those arcades along the street, it's not a concern that it will impede traffic visibility and all that sort of those concerns?
No, it must require the FDOT requirements, which is that the the columns must be less than it's less than half a foot wide, or less than a foot wide. You would have to reference the FDOT requirements, but there is a set amount where the width of the arcade, if it's less than a certain amount, it's allowed.
Any other questions, Patrick? No. Okay, Will? Okay, we'll come back. Go ahead. Oh, he defers to you. Go ahead, Gene.
Sure. Could you go back to the permitted business uses slide, if you don't mind? It's kind of a quick glance. So I see it says if it's not on the list, it is not allowed. Are there any allowances for maybe businesses that aren't specifically delineated on here that maybe are affiliated somehow, or is it this is the exhaustive list and it can't be amended? How does that work?
I believe, yes, I believe that they, would you like to? Yeah.
Angela Van, Planning and Zone Administrator. This list is off of our use out of the main code.
Okay.
Actually, I'm currently updating it, try to reduce it down to like 80 uses and put a lot of things in categories. Because you see our code has a lot of retail, it's just retail. You know, barbershop and they call it personal services, but it's called that as a separate category when it doesn't need to be. So when we do that, a lot of our uses basically should be put in our master use list. So we're going to categorize all our categories in our master use list. So we made retail services. So we have 40 uses in our master use list. So we'll be, when we update this, everything we put in the category, we're trying to, this doesn't account for some of the new uses, new things that have come into, we understand that. And we're working on updating that so that we can get some of the new uses that have come along since we did our permitted use table, probably some 40 years ago. So we're working on it.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Will.
So the road, is it a West Palm Beach road or is that FDOT?
It's an FDOT.
Okay. And so the 17 feet that's going to be created, that's not going to result in a lane reduction?
No.
Okay. And then aesthetically, the neighbors that border to the back, do they want a wall, or would you guys consider like more of a decorative, like, you know, you do like the column and iron gate and vegetation, it doesn't look as, I don't know, you know, an 8-foot wall that's going to go the length of the block could feel a little more of a barrier than a transition. So
we heard from the community that they would like a barrier between them, and they didn't want something like a chain link fence. So there were some requirements for what type of wall we would have along it. And there's been overwhelming support for this 8-foot wall, but we're open to varying it as well and creating some different.
And then the 7-story you put down, clearly that's the maximum, and I realize it's 3 plus with additional affordable housing or AMIs, they could get to 7. Is there any circumstance where an applicant could apply for 12 or 15?
That would become a variant off of it.
So, I mean, there are a couple of things. In essence, no. Under the current regulations, you cannot ask for a variance to increase the height. However, the Live Local Act was established, and under those rules, they could come in and apply for a 20-story building, whatever is within a mile, and we cannot restrict it. They still have to comply with the other zoning and land development regulations, so they have to comply with parking, they have to comply with the setbacks. But if for this creative magic they can fit a 20-story building, we cannot do anything about it. But under the city rules, the height is not a subject to a variance, so they could not come in and ask for a 12-story building under the current rules.
Okay. And then lastly, the concern about deliveries, and because you can't have trucks stopping if you're going to do a mixed use, right? You can't have Cheney Brothers, or let me scratch that, a food delivery company stop on Broadway, right, and impede traffic. So is that being taken into account for sort of the back entry? Does the width that you're providing in the back provide ample space for deliveries, move-ins, move-outs, that kind of thing?
Yes, so we have varieties that have a driveway along the back, and what the different requirements would be for a drive aisle along the rear of the property. There are also properties that have alleys, and we have different varieties for if there's an alley, what the setback requirements are. Every design is unique. We have the requirements for what the minimum is of the setback, but if they want to extend past what the setback requirement is, that's allowed. It becomes a case-by-case scenario for how far in they want to go past the requirements.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Peter, any questions?
Yeah. Some of my comments are maybe a little bit premature, but I appreciate that this is strictly a zoning application. And you're right, it's the setbacks are very linear. It's a very, very long street. And my impressions are, I don't see any gathering places like little parquets, something to break up all that landscaping. I don't see benches, bike racks, or I'm supposing that comes in the future when you do the actual landscaping plan. But any thoughts on coordinating the building numbering or the signage? Also, what's the image of BMUD that you're trying to create? It's 1900s, 1800s, whatever it is. Is there an image for the redesign of that whole street?
There isn't a requirement for image at the moment. It's more of a zoning regulation for what the different setback requirements would be and the height limitations and the uses. But it's not a exact image of what the building would look like. That would be a separate document to this zoning.
And maybe also along the same lines, some consideration to making a series of blocks different, 3 blocks of one theme, 3, 4 blocks of another theme, rather than treating, 50 blocks along Broadway the same way. Also, has the city done a financial feasibility, a pro forma, to test little lots, medium lots, large lots, to see if it makes financial sense for developers to come in?
Yes, we have. Would you like to speak more on?
Yes. So a couple of answers for your questions. The gathering spaces. The regulations include specific requirements for bike racks, benches, trees, and trees. Within that, the 17-feet setback. So every certain linear feet, they will have to provide something, unless they are already provided or we have certain provisions in there. So that's in terms of amenities for that linear space. In terms of gathering spaces, we discussed the idea of requiring open space, but the challenge is these sites are very, very tight. So we felt we could not sacrifice the square footage on those sets to require open space. So like in the downtown, you have that open space requirement, so you see the new buildings provide those plazas in the corners or things like that. These sites along Broadway are substantially smaller. So we assessed it and determined that it was not feasible, it was not worth it for the percentage that they could provide. Having said that, there are provisions in the code that allow, for example, the closure of some of the streets. Like in south of 36 on the east side, there are certain streets that are closed, that are blocked. The streets exist, but they're blocked. So the concept is maybe if a developer buys the two sides of that street could fully be closed, and that can become the possibility to create some open spaces for the community, in addition to provide maybe buildings that go over and bridge over and some that. But that will happen on a case-by-case basis. The code allows certain provisions to, it includes certain provisions to allow that, but is not required or prescribed yet. In terms of the financial analysis, yes, we did. We hired Daedalus Advisory Services, and they basically tested the regulation that was put in place. They created performance. They did interview with several developers in the city to test the scenarios, how were the costs of constructions, and test the possibility of doing, basically they did performance to see how it will work. The numbers are tight. Yes, that's the good word. The numbers are tight, with the acknowledgement that there are several things that could vary. For example, the interest rates. We did this analysis 6 months ago. The interest rates have lowered a little bit. They could be lower, they could go higher. So there are things that we cannot control. The same with construction costs. And it could be different options, like maybe there's a land that the owner already has the land, so they don't have to purchase the land to current prices. So there are different things, but in essence, I mean, like the numbers are tight, but they are viable. That's why we end up increasing it from the 6 stories to the 7 stories to give the developers a little bit more flexibility if they can accommodate it. If they have some wider lot for some reason, they can create that additional density that will basically move the needle for the projects.
Okay.
In addition to that, as it was mentioned by Mr. Rook, we're working with the CRA. So there is the possibility of offering some TIF reimbursement to the projects to kind of bridge that gap of financial performance.
Okay, thank you.
Deborah, any questions?
Okay, I have a couple of questions. Going back to the wall, could you better explain that, where the wall will go? How many blocks would that cover? And is that just the one block behind Broadway? I really have a concern about a wall. And I know you said that you offered some type of decorative offering, but I really wonder how well the residents really understand what that wall will signify.
Yes, so this wall would be behind the property, so it's at the, yes. Mm-hmm. So it would be at the property line, pretty much. And this wall, again, we've been talking with the residents and we tested different ideas. I think the biggest concern is feeling like the building is right next to them, and they expressed the desire to have a separation between the BMUD and their properties. But again, we do have the vegetative buffer, which in most likely scenarios, this would even cover the wall. So it wouldn't look like a wall and like the big separation. It would rather look, you know, a variety between the wall and the trees and the vegetation that would be right in front of it. But again, we discussed fences. We had specific guidelines or variances, and this seemed to be the one that the residents liked the most.
Okay. Okay, go back and clarify for me the developers who could get the bonus feet and go up to 7 feet. What were those benefits as it tied into affordable housing?
So the benefits that would be proposed are exactly the same benefits that the City of West Palm Beach already has.
Okay.
Let me find the slide. So as of right now, they can go up to 3 stories. With these bonuses, which are, once again, in correspondence exactly with the ordinance from the City of West Palm Beach, they would have 50% of additional units that they could add, at the maximum of 120% AMI. And again, this would be 25% would be 80% AMI, 45% 100% AMI, and then 30% of the units would be 120% AMI. So the max amount of stories that they could achieve is 7 stories, including these bonuses for the affordable housing.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, Deborah? Sam, any questions?
Yes. So in keeping with this here with your bonus heights, is there any sort of density bonuses or any kind of density requirements, or is it just sticking with the current levels of density that the site already has?
There is no density limitations in the BMOD regulation, so basically it's a form-based code, so you can put as many units as you can fit inside that envelope. So it's prescribed by the form of the building. So the setbacks will determine how big your building is, and you have the setbacks and the height. We have minimum height for the first floor, and then minimum height for the floors above that, so you cannot fit more than the 7 stories.
Mm-hmm.
But if you decide to do it, it depends. If you decide to do super large units and do, I don't know, 5,000 square feet units, as we have seen in the city in some areas, that's great. You can do that, and then you have 10 units. But if you decide to do studios or 1 bedroom, then you can do 50 units. It's up to you, as long as you can fit it in there, and then you can park it, you can do it.
Okay, so the parking regulations don't change even if you're getting bonus height and density.
No, the parking regulation is 1 per unit, so it's lower than what it currently exists. So it will be 1 per unit, and you have to park all of the units. Doesn't matter if they are the affordable or the market. There are some provisions for discounts. I don't remember. Reductions? I think so. We have some provisions for reduction of the parking. If you, let's say you need a waiver for 3 units, you need 3 less spaces. You can provide only like 3 less than what the code requires. So there are provisions for waivers and variances for that type of things.
Okay. And then my last question was, in terms of the commercial uses, is there any thought given to any incentives for specific uses to kind of help to promote, things that might be more community oriented or things that might help the rest of the corridor?
Well, we discussed back at the beginning some incentives for commercial uses, but because the numbers are very tight in these corridors, the decision was to focus on the affordable housing and as a requirement for the zoning and land development regulations. So it was not any effort to attract a particular commercial use. The regulation actually does not require commercial uses on the ground floor at all. So if somebody wants to come in with a full residential building, they could do it. We think the corridor is very long, so not all the ground floor will be developed as a commercial. It's a really long large amount of commercial spaces. So we think the market will regulate. That doesn't mean that maybe the CRA could create a special incentives to attract particular commercial uses to, for example, retain existing small businesses that are in the corridor. That was one of the ones that was discussed at the beginning, that if you have a property that has existing small businesses and you are basically building a new building in there, maybe there could be some CRA programs that could help retain that small business and put them back into the new building once the new building is constructed. But it's not part of the zoning and land development regulation.
So Chris Rugg, Executive Director of the CRA. So the first step was essentially, let's try to get the redevelopment going from just a general development perspective. From a specific use, as Anne Marie just outlined, we would essentially do some type of business analysis of gaps along the corridor. For instance, right now we're hyper-focused on some type of urban grocer or grocery store because of the lack of supermarkets that are in the area. And we've done a study and we know that. So we'll continue to push the development of grocery store. Luckily, we have one coming online here shortly at 45th Street. But as the corridor continues to develop, the CRA has a variety of tools where we could use that, whether it's grants or build-out improvement grants or other type of TIF agreements to help encourage the specific uses that are missing along the corridor. And we'll make that a priority as the corridor matures.
any other questions, Sam?
Nope, those are the only two I had.
Okay, any other questions? Go ahead, Patrick.
I have one additional question that someone else mentioned, it jogged my memory. In your conversations with the neighborhoods, was there any discussion of removing the dead-end walled boundaries to the east, or what was the community's feelings on that?
We did have those conversations with the community, and it was a bit of a variety. Some people really wanted to keep those barriers in place, and some people wanted to remove them. There was an overwhelming majority of people who did want to keep it in place, but we're in agreement that there should be some sort of park area created in those dead-end spots, which is why we have this open space option where you can create some area within those within that area, if you have both of the properties on either side of that dead end, to create a parklet right along there.
All right, thank you so much. All right, thank you. At this point, we'll ask if anyone from the public wish to be heard on this. And ma'am, when you're done, if you could please fill in a card for us, but you could go ahead and come forward and speak. Is there anyone else who wishes to be heard? Please come forward to this lectern. I'm so sorry? Okay. Okay, I will do that now. We did have a swearing in earlier, but some of you may not have been here or may not participate. For those who wish to be heard tonight, if you could please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this proceeding will be truthful?
I do.
Everyone who speaks tonight needs to have a card and to give it to the clerk. But you could do it after you spoke. We just need it as part of the record tonight. So if you could go ahead and proceed. You have 3 minutes, everyone.
Hi, my name is Jennifer March, and I live in Old Northwood. And I am in the 500 block, and I have had the pleasure of living here for 7 years. With these walls in place is the only way that we have calmed streets, children playing in our area, and just a general peace and quiet. You open these walls at the end and it becomes a speedway. It is not what the neighborhood wants, and there will be many, many Old Northwood residents that come and actually fight for that. We fought for that for 20 years ago, and that is something that's very serious to the neighborhood. We're okay with development and building, of course. I mean, that's what's going to happen, and you want that in your neighborhood. But thank you for putting some of the height requirements in there, because that's important too. So thank you, and we really appreciate you keeping our walls.
Well, thank you. Please be sure to complete your card. Come forward, please. Who wants to be heard next? And whoever else wants to speak can get behind one of these two lecterns and wait your turn. Ma'am, if you'll come forward.
Good evening, each and everyone. Good evening.
If you could please come forward and please state your name for the record. Come closer to the microphone, ma'am.
My name is Ermin Dawkins. I bought a house at 617 50th Street in West Palm Beach of the Broadway from 2010. Now I get old now, and I hear a little rumor going on that them going to take away our house and put a high-rising building. So I get a letter to come here tonight, although my feet hurt me, but me have to come to find out, please with respect, we are not going to dash me. If you not come in and take away my house, we are not going to put me and my grandchildren and my children.
Ma'am, we'll have someone from the staff speak with you tonight. There's nothing that we're voting on today that should result in your being removed from your home. There may be other factors, and maybe someone from staff can address your specific concerns, but there's nothing we're voting on tonight that would have a result against you for that.
Okay.
Okay, but we'll have someone speak with you so we can be sure your issues are addressed.
Yes, sir.
Okay?
God bless you.
All right, thank you. If
All
we could
right.
be sure someone speaks with her, I appreciate
Okay,
it.
sir.
All right, please come forward.
Hello, my name is Esperanza Pryor. I live off of Spruce and 39th. My concern is the increased parking that these buildings might bring. I already have tons of traffic because in my area, we're not blocked. So everybody comes through 36, they come through 38th, they come through 40th. We have a school situation there with Northborough, and it is crazy on Spruce. And I just imagine the more issues we're gonna have with these new buildings going up. So I missed half of a part of this meeting. What's the parking situation with these new residential buildings?
Again, you're here to ask, to testify, but we'll have someone from staff speak when you're done to address it, but parking was discussed, and we'll be sure it's addressed before we vote
And traffic?
tonight. All those things, yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public, please come forward. Please be sure those who spoke to complete a card and give it to the clerk. Anyone else who wishes to be heard beside this gentleman? If so, please come to this lectern. Go ahead, sir. Please state your
My
name.
name is Kenneth Gray. I'm here for Rita Hatcher. She's at 614 27th Street. On the pictures, they talked about doing something with the side streets, which I didn't understand. So if they could explain that to me, I'm kind of concerned. Are they going to dress it up and take some of her property away in front to make parking? Because really, she lives right there for one of the lots that they're talking about. So I'm just trying to get some clarification on that.
We'll have that clarified for you, sir.
I appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Anyone else wishes to be heard? And if not, can someone from the staff, I know we just lost someone, either Anna Marie or Angela, if you could come forward, and I just want to have a couple questions asked so they're addressed. If you come forward to the lectern. With respect to parking and traffic, I assume what we're voting on today won't affect whatever the rules and regulations that currently apply to these properties?
The regulation, it's there are proposed changes for parking, but in essence, like if every unit will be required to provide one parking space, and then commercial users will have a ratio also for commercial. So it's not that they come in without parking provided on site. So they're still applicable.
So any new structure would have to meet the parking requirements that we're
Correct,
setting forth
yes.
tonight. And with respect to traffic, can you address that issue for those who were concerned about that?
Well, in terms of parking, the traffic, the corridor has a maximum development capacity that is established by the comprehensive plan. So the intention is to not to modify that maximum development capacity. Right now it's 830,000 square feet of commercial or 830 residential units. So with the proposed regulation, what is gonna happen, we hope to have more than 830 residential units in there, but we are, as soon as we adopt this, we're gonna start the process of amending the comp plan to modify the caps, but it's like moving capacity from the commercial to the residential, so overall traffic will not be affected. It's like we will maintain the same capacity in terms of traffic that is allowed in the corridor.
So what is presently allowed in the corridor today for traffic, we don't anticipate when everything's done that maximum capacity is going to be increased?
No. Okay. Basically, is what is allowed under the current rules.
And lastly, this gentleman's concern that his relative's property may be taken under this. There's nothing we're doing here tonight that will result in any kind of taking of someone's property.
Nothing. I mean, these are regulations, it's just putting in place the rules for redevelopment. So nobody is taking any property.
So, sir, I just want to make sure you understand nothing is going to be taken here tonight based on our vote tonight. Okay, she just confirmed that for you.
Yeah, well, I understand that, but I was wondering what they said they were going to do something with the side streets. She wasn't specific on which side streets she's going to impact.
Do you understand his concern?
Maybe it's about the closure of the streets?
No, that may happen, not the closure.
Oh, the expanded area. Yeah, so maybe he's making reference to the provisions about the expanded area. And those are regulations that allow developers that if they acquire the property on adjacent to Broadway, they could apply to allow them to increase, do additional development in there.
But they would have to have acquired.
They have to acquire the
property. They have to
properties.
buy it from
yes,
her if she
so
wished to sell. But if they end up buying it, then they could do certain things with it, but nothing's going to be imposed on her.
Yeah, they will have to acquire the property. In addition, I mean, one thing that is like the regulation is putting in place certain parameters of that, how that could happen, but it's not rezoning the properties or increasing the density as of right.
And
So
lastly,
each project will have to come forward specifically to apply for the future land use amendment change for the rezoning and the project.
And they will
be
have
to
to own the property to see.
And they have to own the
that
property,
addresses-
yes.
And someone else had the concern that the road closures, there's nothing we're doing tonight, voting on, that would affect the existing road closures.
Nothing.
Okay.
One quick, Anna Maria, could you talk about street parking along Broadway?
There is no on-street parking
I know.
along Broadway.
And not-
FDOT
not-
will not allow it.
It's not in this plan.
It's not an option. It's a FDOT road.
It's tight,
So
as she's fond of saying. Everything's tight on this project. Okay. All right. Anyone else from the public wish to be heard? Ma'am, did you? Go ahead. Come forward. Please state your name one more time and you can ask your question.
Esperanza Pryor. Again, are they going to have street parking in the alleys? Are those going to be a parking
Now, my
zone?
understanding is whatever is currently allowed won't be affected by this. Whatever is not allowed is not going to be changed by what they're doing here tonight. But I'll get confirmation on that.
Thank you.
Okay. So can someone please confirm, is there anything new that's being allowed that is not presently allowed with regard to parking in the alleyway? Is there any change based on what we're voting
you're
on
not
tonight?
allowed to park on the alleyway right now.
So that's not changed by what
that's
we're
not
voting on. That's the
changed. So-
question.
But new projects may have access
You can speak
to
with her afterwards,
parking
yeah.
from the alley. That's the provision.
Sure, I understand. Okay. Thank you so much. This
An
is-
additional note is that existing alleyways are not within the lot lines.
Right.
So that's why there's a different zoning requirement for alley setbacks than there are for non-existent alley
But the
setbacks.
specific question was parking in alleys.
Yes.
And that's not affected by
If
what
they're
we're
not
doing here
currently
tonight.
allowed, they're not going to be allowed with this zoning.
Thank you so much. Anyone else from the public wishes to be heard who's not been heard from? And those who have been heard, again, you need to please complete a card and give it to the clerk. We'll now bring it back to the board for discussion. I'm just going to go down the row. If you have any comments, I'll start with you, Gene. Anything you want to say before we vote on this?
No.
Patrick?
I will just applaud staff for conducting this study. It seems very thorough, very thoughtful. It's been studied tremendously, this concept of the middle, which I think you guys pretty well laid out for us. You know, the idea that not everyone has to live in a single-family home or a 500-unit apartment building. I think having that diversity and form in our community is certainly something we should all be supportive of.
Will?
You know, as you were talking and looking at this image, I think what you're going to wind up seeing is what you see at the villas on Antique Row or Magnolia Court, where it's 3 stories, you know, and it's not something that really breaks up the neighborhood or looks out of place. I think the other thing is that, you know, we had one applicant who had come in a few months ago who was working on one of those parcels. And the parcels are really tiny, so you're not talking about a huge amount of density or traffic that's going to result from that. I can't imagine a 7-story building on some of those properties will produce more than 20 units. So it's not really a huge amount of traffic or density. So, yeah, I think it's definitely going to give a facelift for an important artery that leads people into the city. Just like the project at the 8111 site, so it's good.
Peter, any comments?
I appreciate the tremendous amount of work that the CRA and the city have put into this, and I hope that it's sufficient of a catalyst to encourage redevelopment in these areas.
Deborah?
Yeah, I think this is long overdue, so I do, you know, commend the work that's being done, especially with CRA. However, I do hope there will be a couple of more meetings with the residents to clarify some of the misgivings and concerns they may have. They want the improvement, but they are holding on tightly to their properties, and they just want that assurance. So I think that, and that you've had some charrettes, it would be worth having a few more, just so that you get that wide circle of, and I know you have to mail the information to in a certain area, but I could hear the concern for those who are here, and I think it would be beneficial to just try to set some of those concerns, set their concerns at ease.
Sam?
I know this has been an area for a long time that a lot of people in the city have wanted to see grow like this. I'm curious, I agree. I hope it's the right catalyst to finally get things moving here. You expressed that a lot of the businesses felt, or the developers felt, that it was still a little tight. I mean, do we feel confident that this is enough to get the development moving in the right direction finally here?
Chris Rug, Executive Director, CRA. I had a developer tell me that when you have a consultant run the numbers, it's kind of like the coach on the sideline. And really, until you get into the projects and understand what is going on, that really you'll know at that point. So we took those numbers that Daedalus did, and we actually gave them to a variety of developers that run all kinds of different projects, multifamily, single family, and everything. And they agreed with the analysis. They said, yes, it's tight relative to interest rates and construction costs. But really, those are external factors that you can't control. And the way that you've adopted the regulations are going to be the best shot right now to spur redevelopment. And so when we heard that feedback back from the development community, we feel like this is, with all the community outreach and all the support, and knowing that everybody is essentially supportive that we've talked to date, that we're pretty comfortable that this will be the catalyst. And judging by some of the conversations that have already started as a result of this exercise with the development community, it looks promising.
Does the revision that we're voting on, does it leave room for amending down the road if we feel if there needs to be more kind of added, or?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. The idea is we want to put it in place, start to test in it, and if we see it's not working, the idea is like getting feedback immediately and try to adjust those things. I mean, it's tied not only for the numbers, but because the sites are tied, the neighborhoods are single family next to it, so we discussed like it's not that we can do a super tall building in there. We have the benefit of the CRA in there, so there's some possibility of some financial support to fill in that gap. But until developers don't start to try to make it work, we will not know what is not working.
Got it. Okay.
Any other comments, Sam?
No?
Okay. I'd like to add my own comments before we bring it to a vote. I just want to say I've been very impressed by everything I've heard here tonight. This is an area of the city that very much needs this help. I thought the process was thoughtful and comprehensive. I think the result seems to hold a lot of promise. And there's no guarantees, but I feel it's the right step at the right time. So I commend everyone who spoke tonight. I was very impressed with what I heard, and I will be enthusiastically voting in favor of this. So at this point, we're looking for a motion. Go ahead.
Motion. Do you need a second?
Take your time.
All right, so we're doing the...
No, neither one. It's on the computer.
You want to do it, Gene?
Sure.
You ready?
He's got it.
Go for it.
Teed up.
Sure. I move that the Planning Board recommend to the City Commission approval of Code Revision Case 24-04.
No, I don't think that's the one we're voting on.
I'm sorry?
That's not the one we're voting on. We're voting
I'll
on
do it.
1380D and 1380.
I move that the Planning Board recommend
looks like
to the
Peter's.
City Commission approval of Planning Board Case number 1380E a city-initiated request for a text amendment.
Do we need, excuse me, do we need to do D first, Mr. Thomas? I think we need
We gotta do D
and then
first.
E. We're voting on both, but we have to have the right sequence.
On the sequence, okay, that's a D.
Scroll back up.
Okay, all right, we're bringing up.
Okay, D. Well, the first sentence is the same. I move that the planning board recommend to the city commission approval of planning board case number 1380D, a city-initiated request for a rezoning to change the zoning designation of the district, consisting of approximately 43.9 acres, located north of 25th Street, south of northern city limits, and the east and west of Florida State Road A18, from Broadway Mixed-Use District Type 1, BMUD 1, and Broadway Mixed-Use District Building Type 2, BMUD 2, to Broadway Mixed-Use District. The motion is based upon the testimony presented at the hearing, along with the application submitted and the staff report, which constitutes competent substantial evidence. The planning board hereby makes findings of fact that the application complies with the required standards and sections 94-32 of the City of West Palm Beach zoning and land development regulations.
All right, we have a motion. Have we a second?
Second.
Motion and second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Second motion.
Part 2. I move that the planning board recommend to the city commission approval of planning board case number 1380E, a city-initiated request for a text amendment to the zoning land development regulations, chapter 94, article 1, sections 94-4, zoning district established, article 7, special districts, sections 94 to 209, mixed use district, and sections 94-219 and 94-220, Broadway mixed use district, to provide the proposed Broadway mixed use district's updated regulations. Motion is based upon the testimony presented at the hearing, along with the application submitted and the staff report, which constitutes competent substantial evidence. The planning board hereby makes finding of fact that the application complies with the required standards in sections 94-32 of the City of West Palm Beach zoning and land development regulations.
Second.
Motion and second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you so much. That brings us then to Code Revision Case 2404. Ms. Van, is that you? Are you doing these together, 2404 and 2405? You can present them jointly or separately?
Mm-hmm. All right.
Ms. Van, are you doing these, presenting these jointly or separately?
Separately.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Okay. Angela Van, Planning and Zoning Administrator, presenting Code Revision Case number 2404. This is basically Live Local, what we talked about. As you remember, Live Local was the act done by the Florida statutes by the legislature to allow the city and developers to do affordable housing within the municipalities for us as in our commercial and industrial districts with little to no, not meeting code requirements, have to meet state statute requirements, and they will have to meet all of the city's land development regulations, and they can go through administrative process. What staff is doing here, particularly for Broadway, you just heard the regulation we're proposing. So we just, first is just taking to align this with the incentive from Broadway. So we're going from 3 to 7 floors to a maximum height of 76 feet. That aligns with the proposed regulations you just heard. And also to authorize limited variances and waivers review for Live Local, workforce housing by the City Commission. Let me currently, again, just to quickly, the regulations limits the maximum height to 6 stories. You just heard that. Now we're amending that to basically go to 7 story to a maximum and align with the regulations. Currently, Live Local authorized limited, this is the limited variances and waivers review for Live Local workforce housing development by City Commission. Even though the city has its own affordable housing workforce incentive, it's still they still have to abide by the state's Live Local Act. The Live Local Act provides for administrative approval process, but they have to meet all the requirements of the zoning and land development regulations. And we find, but does not prohibit the city from establishing a process to allow for waivers and variances. What we're finding out is one project that we had that came in under the Live Local, they can't meet some of our setback requirements. Again, most of our projects are going to be infill, so then you're not talking about large lots, you're talking about smaller lots. A lot is going to be infill projects. So staff was directed to establish a process under Live Local to allow them to go to City Commission for variances and waivers. So that's what this part of this amendment is proposing. Basically, it complies with all the zoning and land development regulations, 9432, and staff recommends approval, quote, vision case number 2404. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
So is this simply to bring our local rules and regulations into compliance with the state law?
No, because right now the state law,
Preempts
basically, it says that our city attorney's interpretation, it says that they have to meet all of our requirements. But it doesn't say that we can't establish a process by which they can request a waiver from our zoning and land development regulation and still use the Live Local process. Because right now, if you come with a Live Local project today, you have to just come in, meet all of our code requirements, and you basically have an administrative process. So based on the project that we've had on Broadway and talking to our city attorney, we were directed to give them an option. They still want to use Live Local because they can't get the density or otherwise, or the height otherwise without using Live Local. But staff wanted to give the administration wanted to give the applicants an opportunity to go before the city commission and get a city commission opportunity.
If we have city regulations that they can't meet, and under the Live Local statute they would have to meet, why would we want to undercut our own local rules and ordinances?
We were directed by administration
Okay.
to provide the option in the code.
When you say the administration, you mean the city administration?
City administration.
All right. All right. All right. Any questions of staff?
So in a nutshell, because the city is the author of the regulations, basically allowing the city leeway to amend those so that there can be compliance with Live Local. Because if Live Local says to comply with Live Local, you have to comply with the local, then local is just making, I
Sure.
guess, okay.
Based on our city attorney's interpretation, yes.
Okay, yeah.
So I'm still struggling a little bit with this, Gene, but if it makes sense to you. Because
if
to
the
me,
city is the
to me,
author.
I know, but to me, the city has its own rules and regulations. If the state statute says they have to comply with them, and now we're giving them an exemption, or going to allow a process by which they can avoid rules and regulations to which they're being controlled, I don't understand why that's necessarily a good thing.
But the city could always amend those rules and regulations ultimately. I guess it's...
They probably could, but why would we have a blanket?
It's not blanket. It's not blanket. It's only for, I go back, I think it's only
No,
for
but we're allowing...
setbacks. The waiver request is only for a few things. Setbacks is for landscaping, and I think it's parking. That's it.
But someone applying under this state statute would have a right that some other applicant wouldn't have.
No,
Because
that's
of-
it.
Okay, if there was already a right for waivers and everything else too under the existing one, then this is unnecessary. So people under this rule are getting something more
Well, I think
than someone not applying under the statute gets, right?
Well, and not to speak for city administration, but I think the whole thing was somebody comes in with a Live Local application and they can get, like I say, it's unlimited because BMUD has no density. So, and then they can get whatever the highest height within 1 mile of it. So basically it allows them to come in and
Well, I can understand
I don't
why
want
they
to
would
speak to the
want it.
administration, but
I'm just trying to understand why the city would want it. I understand why
the
a developer
administration
would
was
want it.
directed because somebody wants to come in and do a workforce housing project. They didn't want to impede them from doing a workforce housing project that the applicant said could not work under our regulations. Because again, our affordable housing workforce regulations would limit them to a height, and that's their issue. We'll limit the height for them, as opposed to using live local. You can do unlimited density, and you can go up to, the height of the district within the 1 mile based on live local.
But the state law would require them to accept our rules and regulations. And here we're being asked to provide a way they can exempt themselves from our rules
They
and
can
regulations.
ask for a waiver or variance and then be approved.
They couldn't without this change.
They could not today, no.
Yeah.
Today they would have to, based on live local.
Mr.
But the
Thomas,
city
do you
admini-
understand my question? What I'm trying to understand is right now, someone who makes application under this live local law is subject to West Palm Beach rules, regulations, ordinance. If those rules, regulations, ordinance allow for a waiver, they would have that right. This would be unnecessary. But this would be giving someone who makes application under this state statute, if we grant this, a right to a waiver or whatever else that someone who didn't apply under the state statute would be entitled to, right?
No, I think.
I'm just asking, let me ask the
But
lawyer first, and then you can
processes
respond.
have waivers.
Well,
Both
my
processes
sense
have
is
waivers.
that the city wants the discretion to look at a project if they think it's worth it, that they can grant these waivers.
But doesn't the city already have that right, or they can make a change in for anyone? They don't have to be under the statute.
If I'm understanding from Angela's presentation, under live local, they've got to comply with the city requirement.
Right, which we're about to.
This action is giving them the option to request a waiver of city
I
requirement.
understand that, and I'm just trying to understand why we, the city, would want that if we're the ones who put these rules and regulations in place to begin with. And we're gonna
And we
exempt
don't know,
them.
except that I would imagine the city would want the discretion to review any project in case they
But then
think it's
they should
beneficial.
make that across the board, not just applicants under the statute, right?
Well,
But isn't there already a process
I
to
mean-
request waivers?
Again, staff is taking this through because we were directed by city administration.
Understand that.
But the problem, I understand what you're saying, and Anna can talk. Today, under our workforce housing requirements and live local, they both, current workforce housing already allows waiver and variances. Somebody can come in
So
with
this
a
is
project.
unnecessary then.
So superfluous.
They come in with a project under live local, under our workforce housing, and they can get waivers, they can get variances, they can do that. But they're limited. You're limited by height and you're limited by density.
We, the city, decided to impose those limitations. But we're gonna exempt someone under the state statute if it should be exempt.
We're not exempting them, we're just giving them a process. It's just a process. They still have to go get approval.
I understand what you're saying, I don't understand the rationale. Anna Marie, does this make sense to you? Can you explain it to me?
I think explain it in Spanish might be better.
It might be helpful, yeah, because I'm missing this.
But a clarifying question, this says BMUD. Is this only applying to the BMUD district, or is this citywide?
This is citywide.
It's citywide.
What happens is the clarification, sorry, Ana Maria Ponte. The clarification for the BMOD is because you put it in the leave local, it's not the leave local. The provisions under the city program that had specifically double the density and all that, we have a table that specifically says for each district you are allowed to go to. In this case, the BMOD in particular, because we were working with the BMOD regulation, we needed to adjust it to be 7 stories instead of 6.
Understood.
So that is kind of a different thing.
Right.
So there's 2 different changes.
Understood. I'm fine with both of those.
Okay. So I think if I understand what you're saying, maybe I understand, I don't know, is from your point of view, if the leave local says they are allowed to go as tall and as FAR as the mile around it, but they have to follow the city rules. You're saying if our city rules allow a variance for setback, so we don't need to put this regulation.
Exactly.
And probably you're right. In this case, we are just clarifying it, so it needs to be in there
Well,
based on the city attorney direction.
Just another way to say it is,
Not clarified.
if it makes sense for any applicant to have this opportunity for variance, say shouldn't it apply across the board and not just those applying under the state statute?
Well, the other ones are allowed to ask for variance.
Depends on the area.
The other ones are also allowed to have,
Then what's the purpose of this rule, of this amendment we're seeking? Because it only applies for those who are seeking under this live local amendment.
I think it's a CYA.
no, for the other ones also, right?
That's what we're
No,
voting.
basically, right now today, it's two processes. You can, under our workforce housing, you can do the workforce housing program that the city wrote, which basically goes up to 64 units per acre, depending on where you are. But that allows variances, it allows waivers also. So that process. And then you come in the live local process. The way we originally wrote the live local process was you come in, you can not required, well, just BMUD, not required basically for density in BMUD, just example, and you can get height within 1 mile, no FAR. But that was originally said that no, you had to come in and meet the requirements. That was it. No process, no nothing.
When they passed this state law,
I think I'm understanding
they
it
were
now.
requiring that they respect and honor the local regulations. If our local regulations allow for variance, wonderful. But what you're saying, asking us to vote on here is to give the protections that the city has imposed for development, those protections that the state legislature says that they're subject to those. We're being asked to pass something that would allow an exemption for just those seeking an exemption under this live local one, but not applying to other applicants. It doesn't make sense.
I think what she's describing is that there's two processes. Currently, we have one process that allows for variance.
Right?
We're adding the provision for this separate parallel process
So
for the
Patrick,
same.
let's say, look like your left hand, that process. Why should that not apply for someone making an application under the live local? In other words, we put these regulations in place for the city because we thought it was best for the city. The state legislature has come in and said, we want to give people different rights, better rights, but they have to honor our restrictions. So we're going to say, this is what worked for us in West Palm Beach. Under the states imposing something on us, but restrict them to respect our local rules. Why are we giving them different exceptions? If it's good for the city, then it should be for everyone.
Right, I don't think we should give them, I don't think we should give them something more.
That's what we're doing.
I think we should just give them the same.
We're just giving, it's just a process.
We're just giving them the
We're just doing the process.
Should apply across the board.
Just
then.
the process.
You don't need one unique to the live local. It should
Yeah,
be
but
everyone.
one is the city process, the other is the state process.
And both are allowed to apply for variance.
Yeah.
So under the city's workforce application program, an applicant could apply for the same variances, but because there's the state process, the city just wants to clarify that here's the process for making the same type of application for a state mandated process.
And the reason is because the city, staff originally when this was drafted, the staff position is that if you were coming under the leave local, you were not allowed to request variances or waivers from the regulations.
Right.
So now we are adding this language to say, okay, you can also apply for waivers and variances.
So do we the city embrace the live local laws? Something we want, as opposed to something that was imposed by the state legislature? I've heard at other meetings there seem to be some grumblings about the live local law, that this was something being imposed on us by Tallahassee. It wasn't something we necessarily wanted, and now we're helping facilitate its implementation. And that's the part I'm struggling to understand why we would do it.
Again, I don't know what I can make you understand, Chairman Maines. Basically, staff is bringing this forth because city administration directed staff to come forward. I can't give you an answer.
No, that's
to what
fine.
you want.
That's fine. I think the majority here are going to be very happy to support you. I won't be voting in favor of this because it's not been explained to my satisfaction.
Okay.
But let's not take any more time on it.
All right.
Any other questions of staff?
I would be in favor of tabling it if we do need clarification. I understand where you're coming from as well, but I don't think that we'd be going against state interest. But the way you explain it, I might be a little cautious, but I didn't see it that way at first.
To me, if it makes sense to do, we should do it throughout the city. It shouldn't be, we don't need to make it unique for those applicants under the Live Local statute. If it makes sense for the city, it should be for any applicant.
There'll just be one process, you're saying?
Yeah, a single process, because they are constrained by our process. So to the extent we allow a more liberal process for a state-imposed system that doesn't seem particularly popular with the city, why are we facilitating that?
But staff are still gonna have to make a determination whether they support a variance request or not.
But they should do that for every application.
See, that's a problem when you have a lawyer as a chairman.
What'd you say? I don't know. Anyway, but because I think there's enough support here, and I don't want to, I know you're frustrated, I'm frustrated, but let's go ahead and call a vote.
Well, no,
and move on.
but there is something, so if we're on case
understand your
24-04,
Yeah.
right, it says the request is specifically for the BMUD. Does not mention anything about the rest of the city.
No,
That is a
no, it's not
That
for
was-
BMUD, maybe I did it.
No, he's looking at the right
See what
one.
I did,
but-
no, it's not for BMUD, it's basically for, see, BMUD is this, that's what basically, I think I
You're
put Live
reading it
Local
right,
at the
but I don't
top,
think
what I
that's what
should
we're
have.
voting on. I agree. You're
Basically,
reading it right.
it's
No,
two
you
requests.
have a
Yeah.
request written here that says a city initiated request for a text amendment 94 ZLDR, affordable mixed housing, to increase the
I have
Broadway
no
mixed
problem
use
on
No, it has
district.
nothing to do with, that has nothing to do with BMUD, that's, BMUD
So then
is,
your request-
BMUD is only to request the,
I understand,
increase
but
the
then
incentives.
the
It says right
request
here,
needs to be
decrease the
rewritten and
Broadway-
represented, because it says BMUD.
Are you
we-
looking at?
Are we voting
Angela,
on BMUD? or are we
Angela,
voting
just
on-
look at your screen. Look at the screen. That's what Will's talking about. Angela, just look
Yeah,
at the
it
large
says,
screen.
to basically, to zone the land development, Article 17, affordable workforce house, to increase the Broadway mixed-use district incentives from 3 to 7 story, and to authorize limited variances and work waivers review from Live Local workforce housing developments. It's an and. Separate, it's and.
Okay, okay.
That's the way we.
The first part I got no issue with. That's what we basically voted on. It's part of what we did. No problem with that.
Yeah, that's what it says.
But it's like that slide is
Yeah, well, it says Live Local. Yeah,
So
but it's-
the question was, it is citywide, though the second part is citywide. The and is for the citywide. Okay.
The second part
Yeah.
applies to the Live Local.
What
The
is
first
Live Local?
part
Yeah.
is just for the city
To
program.
increase the Broadway, yes. It's like it's written in the staff report. Just like it's written in the staff report. Read the staff
Yes, you
report.
can ask the question, just put it in the, that'd be on the record, that's all.
Well, I thought that there was, when the Live Local Act came out, didn't the city have a parallel, I forgot what the amendment?
Yeah, it was resolution 306.
Resolution
We had
306.
306. Actually started before Live Local came out.
Right.
Live Local came out midway when we were working on that. And basically we had like 5 applications that came in under the city's
Correct, okay.
regulations. But then Live Local came through and we finally got our own regulations into the code.
Okay.
But you're correct.
Okay, so now we're all on board with Live Local.
Not necessarily on board, but we just have to basically, based on state requirements.
Well, we're no longer
Put it in our-
following
we put it-
306.
yeah, put it
306
in our
just
code.
applied to those 5 applicants,
No, they're still around. A couple of them are actually already approved.
but have more than 5 applied under 306.
The 5 applied on, no, we had 5 on the 306.
Correct. So after those 5 came in, Live Local superseded 306, and then the city's adopting
Yes.
Live Local.
Yes,
Right.
until we, again, came back in and wrote our own regulations in the code. So we wrote our own regulations, which you guys saw back early this year. You saw those regulations
Yes,
that we wrote.
okay.
And we actually put in, which was required by state statute, put the Live Local process embedded in their ordinance. So yes.
Angela, if we're required by the state statute to do it, I'm okay with that. In other words, if the state is telling us we have to adopt this to bring our code into compliance with state law, I would support it if we're required, but that's not how it was explained to me. Sam, do you understand what I'm saying? Is this something that we're required to do under state law to bring our local ordinance into compliance? That's a separate situation.
Yeah. This is a city-initiated request.
Yes, it's a city.
But the question is this something the city's doing to bring us into compliance with state law?
That is my understanding.
No.
The city is providing for the option to grant a waiver
I
from the
know,
requirement of
my
state law.
narrow question was, is this something we're obliged to do to bring city ordinances into compliance with the new state law, Live Local?
But you need an ordinance.
Are
for
we
that.
in trouble
You
with
have
the
to
state if
comply
we
no
don't
matter what.
adopt this, is my question.
We're not seeking to reconcile the city law. I think the city is providing a procedure by which
That's what I understood.
it
Okay,
could grant the waivers.
okay, that's all. All right, any other questions of staff? Anyone from the public wish to be heard on this? Please come forward. You're a good sport to stay around.
Yeah, thank you. We
I'll need you to fill out a card later. You can come to this lectern if you don't mind here, but you can speak first, and then you can fill out a card afterwards. Okay.
Yeah, he's the first applicant.
All right. Please state your name.
Yes, hi, good evening. I am Liam McGuire, and I work for MPLD Consulting. At first, I'm going to say thank you to the staff here. You know, we have several projects with the city, and they're great. So it's always a pleasure to work here. I just wanted to say for the record, our firm, we've held several public outreach endeavors, in the neighborhoods along the Broadway corridor, and from our findings, the majority of the citizens would like to see, 8 stories for height in the code, not taking live local into account, but just from a code-wise, standard. And specifically, Old Northwood, we've had a lot of support for that from them, and
All right, thank you so much.
thank you.
All right, I assume no one else from the public wishes to be heard, because I didn't see a soul else here, so unless, did you want to leave your card? You can leave it with the clerk, the lady with the mask. She's too ashamed to be with us here, so she always hides herself. All right, is there any further discussion? If not, we're looking for a motion.
Now you can read it.
For 2404.
I move that the planning board recommend to the city commission approval of code revision case 24-04. The city initiated request for a text amendment to Article 17, affordable and workforce housing to increase the Broadway mixed-use district, BMUD, incentives and from 3 to 7 stories, and authorize limited variance and waivers review for live local workforce housing developments by the city commission. This motion is based upon the testimony presented at the hearing, along with the application submitted and the staff report, which constitutes competent and substantial evidence. The planning board hereby makes findings of fact that the application complies with the required standards in section 94-32A of the City of West Palm Beach Planning, Zoning, and Land Development Regulations.
All right, we have a motion. Have we a second?
Second.
Motion and second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? I oppose. So I think it passes 6-1. Thank you. Next application, Angela.
Again, Angela Van, Planning and Zoning Administrator. Hopefully this one is more clear. Issues with this one. Again, this is another city-initiated request to do a few things. From time to time, we have issues in the zoning code that come up, and we just need to go through and do a quick fix. And this is to amend the required documentation for proof of ownership, to amend our definition section 94-611, to clarify definition for building height, fence wall height measurements, and explain the issues we're having with that right now, and to amend the definition for dwelling units to allow 1 additional kitchen. Currently right now, because of mostly along in the floodplain area, because of the flood requirement that new homes raise their lots to meet that, and the base area in the city's freeboard and the base flood elevation. We're having issues with walls and fences, for one, coming in that are 8 feet in height on the applicant, on the neighbor side, because right now our code just did not clarify specifically where we measured fences and walls. So we want to make sure that they understand that we measure it from the property line, but not from when you raise your lot up 10 feet, 6 feet. Of course, it's 6 feet on your side, but that's 8 feet on your neighbor's side. So we want to make sure it's clear that we measure fence and walls are measured from the property line at the original grade. So there's no misunderstandings about how you measure your fence and your wall that we've had lately.
I watched the magistrate by chance on TV.
Oh yeah.
That's still a question.
That one's, yeah. And the next one is to clarify the height of a structure, how it's measured from the finished exterior grade, and that's at the grade of the structure. We, again, with these new homes coming in and required to bring in the fill, we want to make it clear that we measure from the exterior grade of the home. So we just want to clarify that, because we've been, again, when somebody comes in and when the code owner really requires you to raise your habitable space, not your garage space, and we've been having issues trying to figure out how to measure some of this stuff. So we want to make that a little clear. And we also want to clarify that you only can bring in the amount of fill that's required to meet the freeboard and the base flood elevation requirement. So if it's only 6 feet, you can't bring in 10 feet of fill. The city's not going to measure from that. So there's certain things we just want to make clarification so it's clear when you come in what you can do for your single-family home, for fences, wall, and for the structure. And for the most part, this is single-family houses. We don't really have this issue with the larger projects. Because of an increase in our high-end condo market in the city of West Palm Beach, there's been an increase in requests to have 2 kitchens. And this amendment's adding basically the following language to say a dwelling unit may have up to 2 kitchens provided, up to 2 kitchens, so we want to make sure it's not 3 or 4, it's up to 2 kitchens, provided all kitchens serve the single dwelling unit only and are for use of a single household. So we'll make it clear nobody's coming in there chopping up their house and putting in 2 kitchens and putting a wall in, they got 2 units. Staff had a little bit of an issue because we wanted to make sure that the single-family homes didn't get chopped up, but we do the best we can to put the languages very clear. Again, staff finds it complies with the zoning and land development regulations, section 9432, amendment standards, and staff recommends approval of code revision case 2405. Have any questions?
Any questions of staff?
Does that apply to the whole city?
Whole city?
And so I had one question. I live in Providencia Park, and the floodplain maps have changed. And one of my neighbors was building a new home, it was a tear down to build a home, and they were told they have to build it 8 feet higher now because of it. Does that mean the size home they build is still going to be measured by the original exterior?
For the house?
Yeah, the house. Does
Yes.
the house, so the house is not going to be 8 feet
No,
shorter?
the house will be 8 feet. We measure from the 8 foot, yes.
Forgive me, I just want to be clear. Is the house going to be measured from the base of the house, or is it measured from the grade?
Base of the house.
From the proposed grade.
Base of the house.
Yeah. Okay, so the size house won't be affected by this, what we're voting
Yes,
on?
it will be. It's measured from,
Eight
it's
feet
measured
higher.
from the
new finished
finished floor.
I'm so sorry.
It's measured from the new finished floor.
Finished floor, that's what I mean, but not from the grade of the lot. So if the lot started here and had to go 8 feet, that won't affect, that's all I want to know. Okay, makes sense. Any other questions of staff?
I just actually had, not to take any more time, the first part of that code revision, proof of ownership of properties.
Oh, you're in trouble, Sam, right? I said you're in trouble, right? You don't own yours?
Well, I wanted just some kind of clarification what that was.
I didn't put it there. Basically what was come up with our city attorney, because of people are coming in with all different mechanisms to get ownership and go through the process. So she wanted to give a mechanism to allow that somebody could come in and put a power, if you come in with the applicant or attorney, you need power of attorney to come in and do that. And also you could bring in, if you have an executed purchase agreement, you can bring that in instead of actual owner's consent form. So we're just basically giving a little more clarity and a little more flexibility given the type of market that we're in.
So a purchase contract would give you the right to go in even if the owner does not consent to it.
We have to have an executed purchase agreement.
So for example, let's say someone buys a property and there's a contingency in it that they need to get certain approval before they close. So they would have a right, in theory, to make the application to see if they could get the approval. But they have enforceable rights to acquire the property. That's the triggering of that. I'm guessing, that's how I'm reading it.
Sam, you're concerned that it's a purchase agreement doesn't mean that property is going to actually close? Is that what you're concerned
Well,
about?
I think the way it says, if you see the language in the code, it says, however, any approvals granted shall be conditioned upon the closing of the purchase prior to undertaking the development activity.
Right.
That's what
so
the
then
actual
they
language
might
says
get
at the end.
Conditional approval from the city saying if you close, you'll be allowed to do it. What's your concern, Sam?
I mean, I'm just thinking, you know, someone wants to.
What's the address?
No, I'm just, I didn't know what was required currently to prove ownership, but I'm thinking that if you don't have ownership or the owner's consent, you could, you know, go to sign a contract on a property, go in for an approval that the owner A, doesn't know about, and B, you know, doesn't want to be, you know, having it.
In your scenario, the owner has sold the property.
They sold the property.
So you say the owner doesn't
Well, they haven't
know
sold
about
it
the owner
yet.
sold
They
the
have a
property.
contract to sell it.
Well, they have
It says
enforceable
a
rights under
potential
it.
purchase of the property who has executed a purchase and sale agreement with the current property owner may submit that.
But they don't currently have a deed. They don't own the property as of yet. You just have a contract.
There's a
to buy the
contingency on
property.
closing, though. There's a contingency on closing, correct?
Yes.
It's a contract.
So you have to provide closing before you could do any development with the city.
Right. But you could go into the city for a rezoning.
Developers do that as a condition of closing.
Well, with the owner's approval,
Right.
not without the owner's approval. So I'm thinking someone doesn't want the.
Sam,
the purchase contract.
the scenario is the property owner has sold the property to a purchaser,
Yeah.
okay? The question is, does a purchaser have the right to see what they can do with the land? They have a right to purchase it at this point. There's a condition, it won't be effective until they actually close, right? Didn't you say that, Angela, that you read
Yeah, the
something?
condition says, and I can read the language right quick. A potential purchaser of a property who has executed a purchase and sales agreement with the current property owner may submit an application with respect to the property provided either a power of attorney form, the current property owner, or a copy of the purchase contract accompanies the application. However, any approval granted shall be conditioned upon the closing of the purchase prior to
So it's
undertaking the
conditional.
development activity.
The city's approval is conditioned upon them actually closing and acquiring the property.
So you're saying it's conditional
I
upon-
guess I'm not sure why that's needed.
Well, I could give
Well,
an
if I wanted to
example.
if I have a 60-day close and I wanted to get a head start on my application, I could then take that, put it into the city, put my plans into the city, get the process started, and then upon closing,
You can do that now. You just need to have the property owner's consent. So you're basically giving somebody rights to
I
do
think-
something on a property they don't have.
This isn't a stranger, this is someone who just purchased the property.
They didn't purchase the
They
property.
have a contract, they have
They have a
enforceable
contract.
rights. Yeah.
But they don't
And I
own.
think what our city attorneys, again, this is from the city attorney's office, created, I think what they've got a lot of questions from developers who was going through the process and didn't want to provide, they wanted to do the purchase contract, could we do this, could we do power of attorney? So in an attempt to try to clarify and bring us up to the current times, this is what the text amendment was.
The only scenario I
proposed.
could think that would come into play is if you want to go into the city to do something or to ask about something that you don't want the property owner to know about.
Sam, are you thinking about a situation where you may be owning?
No,
a-
I'm not thinking about any particular situation. I'm thinking if you own a property and you have a.
I can give you an example, Sam. We've had a client on the island that had a conditional sale. They had a 48-month closing period. They asked us to design the project ahead of the actual close because it takes 14 months to develop a project. So essentially, the owner's they've already signed a purchase agreement. They will close in 2026, but we'll have the whole project designed and permitted prior to close.
But
why not? I think. I think your concern is why not to provide a owner's consent.
I think the owner should be consented. If they still own the property, they should be.
I think the whole point of this was to simplify the process. I would say that an owner who has contractually agreed to sell their property, has enforceable rights to force the closing, has implicitly given consent for the would-be buyer to see what they could do with the property. Remember, what the city's going to approve is conditioned upon their ultimately being
I'll give you an example that, okay, so I go to sell my property and I don't want it to be kind of, I don't want it as public as, some people might not care, some people might not want it public.
And then you make that a condition in your purchase. In other words, when you sign a contract for purchase sale, you can put any conditions you want on that contract. So if you don't want it known, or you want to have some
okay, but so let's say I'm not thinking about any ramifications. So I sign a contract. You then go to the city. You propose, a crazy plan to do all sorts of things, and it gets everybody up in arms. And you have one of these meetings with 50 people yelling and screaming about this, that, or the other, and all of a sudden they're looking at that guy's selling the property, and he's, and he didn't know anything about it. I think the owner should have consent. If you own a property, you should have consent. That someone has the right to go in.
To me, it's like a type 1, type 2 error. What you are concerned about is a legitimate small concern. I think the more you tighten that alpha error, the greater let me finish my thought, the greater the beta error, that legitimate projects are going to be stalled because the contract purchaser, who is one who's motivated and going to spend the money, can't move forward, and it's going to result in delays.
Let me give you a good example. I buy a piece of land that has got a certain zoning on it. I make a purchase and sale agreement with you for $100,000 based on the fact that the current zoning allows a 4-story building. Then I go to the city and apply for rezoning to permit an 8-story building. I don't want to tell you, because then you're going to look for every possible way to cancel the contract to increase the price of the land, because the land now is doubled in value. That's what happens.
Yeah, Sam, one way to control that is to just have a contract as between you and the purchaser that you don't want certain things disclosed, and if they breach that, then you have a separate action against that purchaser. And so if that would include going to the city and then making the sale public, then that would be a breach of contract. But on a principal basis,
as far as I understand right now, if I want to call the city and ask about something about a certain property, I don't have to have any contract on it to have a discussion about something on a property.
Right, but if you want to go through a process.
But if I want to go through a process on a certain property, then I need to have some mechanism of ownership. I think a property owner, you're taking the rights away from a private property owner and giving it to.
So innocent.
It's not final though.
The person sold the property.
It's not that it's final, but in today's world, anything can be. I think.
So if you're changing zoning from A to B, B isn't final until the closing actually occurs. So no rights have been taken away. So you're not wronged in any way as the current owner of the property.
But why not require, if somebody wants to go through the process of rezoning or doing anything on a property, that you must have a consent of the property owner?
Well, we've heard several examples of why you wouldn't want what you just said, the restriction, because it sometimes takes a lot of money to go through this approval process, and therefore the person who will take the time and spend the money is the one who plans to purchase the property. They would have a contractual right to buy it. Before they close, though, they want to see if they could do the examples you've heard. So I appreciate your reservations, but I think we've talked it out. So I would think any other questions, we should call for a vote and move on.
So you sold it too cheap, is that it?
No, it's nothing to do with, no.
I understand your concern.
I'm actually shocked that no one sees what I'm saying.
No, we see what you're saying, but what you're missing, I see that part, what you're not seeing is the many advantages of adopting this. That there'll be a lot more times where the owner may be fully fine with this, they're aware of it, but the person who's gonna be champion is the one who has it under contract to buy it. They're the ones spending money with all the professionals. going through the expensive
But
process.
okay, so let's say I provide the city with a contract that's completely forged, that the property owner has no idea about, and they never actually signed it. Are you verifying that it's a legitimate contract?
Sam, that's no different under your thing where they get the consent of the seller, and that could be forged too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're gonna allow that, gonna insert that possibility, it's across the board. Not adopting that doesn't protect someone from having a fraudulent document from the seller saying, yep, you have my consent. Okay, any further discussion?
I would just like to thank staff for allowing us to do 2 kitchens. It's a big thing.
I didn't hear what you said.
Happy holidays.
Thank you for the
Thank you
congressional
for 2
debates.
kitchens.
I still did, anyway. All right, I'm looking for a motion.
Motion.
Adjourn.
Okay, you need to be a little more specific.
All right, so we're doing 2405.
Yeah.
I move that the planning board recommend to the city commission approval of code revision case number 24-05, a city-initiated text amendment to the zoning and land development regulations, ELDRs, at section 94-41, applications to amend required documentation for proof of ownership, and section 94-611, definitions to clarify the definition for building height, fence wall height, measurement, and dwelling unit. The motion is based upon the testimony presented at the hearing, along with the application submitted in the staff report, which constitutes competent substantial evidence. The planning board hereby makes findings of fact that the application complies with the required standards in section 94-32A of the City of West Palm Beach zoning and land development regulations.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, Sam?
I oppose.
All right. So it passes 6-1. All right, that brings us then to other business, unfinished business, new business, anything
No,
else,
this is
Angela?
just wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and see you
Same
next
to
year.
All right, thank you all. We
Merry
stand adjourned.
Happy
Christmas.
Hanukkah.
Thank you.